Hello, everyone. Welcome to the PARI Center and our continuing series, The Science of Wholeness, Perspectives from Physics, Ecology, Psychology, and Philosophy. Over 3 weekends, we are investigating the extent to which modern science has encountered aspects of wholeness, non-local consciousness, and the subject-object distinction. We also consider what a post-reductionist science might look like by drawing upon the experiences of indigenous cultures. Today, we will be discussing Holocentric Indigenous Consciousness with Tiokasin Ghosthorse, Robert Toth, and John Briggs. Tiokasin Ghosthorse, Lakota, Cheyenne River, Lakota Nation of South Dakota, has a long history of indigenous activism and advocacy. He is a guest lecturer at many universities and an international speaker on peace, indigenous, and Mother Earth perspectives, cosmology, ecology, and forestry, and perspectives on the relational egalitarian versus rational hierarchical thinking processes of Western society. A sun dancer in the Lakota Nation tradition, he describes himself as a perfectly flawed human being. Robert G. Toth co-edited Bridges to Contemplative Living with Thomas Merton, a popular series designed for small group dialogue. He is an active member of the Contemplative Alliance, an initiative of the Global Peace Initiative of Women. He also serves on the board of the Lake Erie Institute, which offers holistic ecological leadership programs to individuals engaged in creating flourishing, regenerative, and socially just communities. John Briggs, PhD, taught for 25 years at Western Connecticut State University. He has taught aesthetics, journalism, and creative writing, and served as co-chair of the English department. He is also one of the 3 principal developers of the MFA in professional and creative writing. He co-authored 3 books with David Peat, Looking Glass Universe, Turbulent Mirror, An Illustrated Guide to Chaos Theory, and The Science of Wholeness, and 7 Life Lessons of Chaos. We would also like to thank the curator and chair for this series, Dr. Jonathan Alday, who has put together this series in the most thoughtful way. I will now hand over the discussion to Tiokasin.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good tomorrow. Chante waste na pechus apielo le unkipiki hohewastelo. I want to say that's good for all of us to be here, and of course, extend my heart with this good hand and a good handshake for you, with you. And today is very special for me because my heart's beating, and it's beating very extra right now because I'm excited to have dialogue with you wherever you are from, what continent and part of Earth you're on, that we all partake in and have responsibility to and for and with. And I say those 3 words, to, for, and with. Maybe they describe this responsibility rather than a right to, or for, or with. And I think it's Mother Earth that gives us the responsibility. And I think humans take it as a right and divide that up. So I want to say that because I'm really thinking, before I came in here, I presented some tobacco and the way we are to introduce Earth and then bring that Earth into this dialogue, this hour or so we're going to spend online here. And I want to thank both the PARI Center and the 2 friends that compel me to speak the way I do right here in front of you. And I like to be very simple about things and not try to go too far into the academic world. And that's not up to me to do so because my experience is different. And I really enjoy being here. So I'd like to thank you, and that's really about it. And I wanted the flute to play first of all, and because that's the proper introduction. And if that could have happened, that's the car I don't drive. Let's put it that way.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. Thank you for that again. That was what was that now? Joy Askew, who also sang backup and lead for Peter Gabriel, and that was done about 8 years ago in the studios in New Jersey. And the reason why I want the flute to be there because it's older than we are, and that it is in all cultures, the flute. And we understand that there was some other presence here before any human showed up. So I want to bring that thought into this session we're going to have. But I want to thank you again, John Briggs and Bob Toth, for compelling this session and for Perry Center. So I think that's all I have for this opening, and let's get to it. And thank you all for showing up. And I want to make sure that you know that I'm not a medicine man or a guru or some knowledgeable person, but I have experience. And I want you not to know what I know or the knowledge I know or the information, because that all changes. What I would ask you to be is in the present. What you're thinking is what I'm trying to compel here, is what I'm thinking at the same time, and to stay in the present with this. I know we'll go to the future and to the past and all this to put us here, but I think it will all come together at the end of this session. Thank you. John?
John, I think your microphone is muted.
Sorry. As the sound of the flute sort of drifts off into the atmosphere, maybe it would be interesting to consider that sound as the first glimpse of the traditional indigenous whole. As you heard that, you were hearing the whole in action. For the session today, Bob and I are going to read some narrative from the book that the three of us, hang on a second, I got something in my, there you go. The three of us are working on a book that we're calling Earth Mind. And I want to read some passages that bear directly on the issue of wholeness as experienced in the indigenous context. Between the readings, Tiokasin will expand and focus the material. The thesis of the book is relatively simple to state, but its ramifications are immensely subtle and complex. So here's the simple part. As a fruitful way of thinking about human consciousness and its relationship to what is, the book proposes that the human species came into existence endowed with two radically different but complementary modes of consciousness. Both modes can be understood as having arisen from our evolutionary history and our interactions with beings as beings embedded in the continuously unfolding natural world. Jonathan, if you could put up the first slide. The first mode to consider, oh, that car again, wow. You'll see that that intervention of that car is probably has something to do with the anthropocentric mode of consciousness injecting itself into our discussion. So here's the precursor to the car. The first mode to consider is the consciousness that people are most familiar with, the mode that dominates human life on the planet today. In our book, we call it the anthropocentric consciousness. Anthropocentric means human-centered. The anthropocentric mode is an object-based consciousness, meaning that it perceives and organizes reality in terms of separate items, separate physical items like grasshoppers, automobiles, like that one, and subatomic particles, as well as separate conceptual items like justice, God, and that elusive, imperious conceptual object, the me, the I. Operating for the last several thousand years in an inflamed and swollen state, Anthropocentric human consciousness has constructed a large variety of cultures and societies with common characteristics. Anthropocentric consciousness is the utilitarian, tool-making consciousness whose artifacts archaeologists find in the abandoned husks of ancient civilizations. It is the consciousness that shapes its imagined realities in terms of hierarchies, bureaucracies, cause and effect relationships, processes and movements from point A to point B. It emphasizes nouns over verbs. It objectifies time. It casts its net of awareness in terms of opposition, polarization, duality, competition, ambition, successes and failures. It is closely tied to the primitive fight or flight response. Depression, mistrust, and positive and negative assessments of self-worth are all rooted in the anthropocentric mode, as is curiosity, the desire to know how things work. Anthropocentric consciousness is vital, obviously, for our species and takes a central role in our ability to make tools and language to understand causal chains and to forge fruitful discriminations of all kinds. It's vital for our ability to accumulate and pass on factual knowledge and to have an awareness of ourselves as separate individuals. That said, our current situation on planet Earth is telling us that human beings have fallen into a lethal fixation on anthropocentric consciousness to the exclusion of the second complementary mode of consciousness that is the primary focus of today's webinar. The holocentric mode, the mode of consciousness that is centered on the whole, and Tiokasin likes quoting Black Elk, who observed that for holocentric consciousness, the center is everywhere. You could have the next slide, please. The second mode of consciousness shows up on the walls of caves where paleoarchaeologists shine their torches. What do these figures mean? As with attempts to decipher or interpret the meaning of a great work of art, it's easy to misapprehend the activity of the holocentric mode of consciousness when it is being seen through the anthropocentric lens and translated into anthropocentric concepts. Put simply, the holocentric or earth-mind mode of consciousness experiences the world as an interrelated, interpenetrating, utterly interwoven whole whose center is everywhere. We might characterize this consciousness or awareness in terms of an upwelling of feelings of trust, blessing, wonder, and unity with the whole universe, beginning with the natural world. The holocentric or earth-mind mode experiences itself as embedded in the activities of animals, plants, rivers, clouds, and stones, who, while distinct in themselves, are not fundamentally separate from each other. For the earth mind, the world is alive in a way that anthropocentric consciousness cannot explain or comprehend. Lame Deer, Lakota, described this holistic aliveness in terms and trust in terms of spirit. The spirit is everywhere, Lame Deer wrote. Sometimes it shows itself through an animal, a bird, some trees and hills. Sometimes it speaks from the Badlands, a stone, or even from water. Lacking time to get into some deliciously interesting detail, let us just say that in McGilchrist's compendium of research that he's done in the last half century on the role of our cerebral hemispheres, the left brain and the right brain, suggests an uncanny fit with our picture of two modes of consciousness, entwined but radically distinct. The research lends credence to a speculation that social and cultural orders and ways of life may be grounded in anthropocentric thinking, or they may be grounded in holistic thinking. McGilchrist argues that because of the left brain role in creating divisions in our perception of the world, the left hemisphere is not suited to be the primary grounding mode of consciousness. Yet that is exactly what has happened in humanity's recent history. Aboriginal philosopher Tyson Yunkaporta calls this the work of the Imu, the troublemaker, who, quote, brings into being the most destructive idea in existence. I am greater than you are less than me. This is the source of all human misery, end quote. One object lording itself over another object. Emu's idea is a quintessentially anthropocentric one. The left brain renders the world explicit, a stage with actors and scenery watched by an audience. The right brain brings forth a world that is implicitly unified and indivisible, with no actors, no stage, no audience. The nature of the whole is its implicitness, which David Bohm famously described as an implicate order. We have found that Earth mind peoples live in a remarkably implicit way. The tools of the implicit, metaphor, irony, and connotation are right brain specialties, and our indigenous friends use these words extensively. McGill-Chris writes that there are a number of reasons for, quote, supposing that the right hemisphere plays a primary grounding role in the relationship between the hemispheres. The primacy, of wholeness, he says, means that the right hemisphere deals with the world before separation, division, analysis have transformed it into something else, before the left hemisphere has filtered it and shaped it. Nevertheless, we now live in a human world where most people are dominated by left brain thinking and experience, a world chock full of anthropocentrically grounded, thing-based and thing-haunted human beings. I'd like to say at this point that our book is fashioned as a dialogue between these two modes of consciousness, with the intent to foster in each a better understanding of the other, and knowing that a balance between them is essential, and balance is one of the several concepts that's central to many indigenous traditions. Bob. You're there, Bob.
Okay, thanks. What John and I have learned over the past several years is that indigenous consciousness is shot through with attention to and preoccupation with the whole. We feel confident in saying that original peoples who organize their lives in their traditional ways are peoples whose consciousness is grounded in the whole. Here are just a few of the places in Native thinking and culture where this primary awareness and experience of the whole may be observed. Next slide, please. So they observe these in their ceremony, in reciprocity, in Mitakuye Oyasin, which is all our relations, in metaphors and holophors, balancing, shape-shifting and flux, in the hoop dance of life, in co-creation, in mystery, in their original instructions, and in all relationship. The words on this list should not be taken as ideas or concepts. More precisely, to our anthropocentric thing-focused way of thinking, they may seem to be ideas, but to original peoples, they are only pointers. These seeming concepts are more like fields of being, energy flowing where they experience themselves, not as one thing bouncing off and knocking against other things, but where they find themselves, in Leroy Little Bear's phrase, a la Bohm, as fluid beings surfing the holoflux. What we heard and observed over the course of several years of conversations with Native interlocutors suggests that it would be hard to overestimate the importance that ceremony plays in earth-mind consciousness. An anthropologist observing indigenous ceremony from the outside might conclude, as many have, that a ceremony is an act occurring in sacred space and time, regarded as distinct from profane space and time, and practiced in a prescribed way for dogmatic or pragmatic purposes. But the reality is far different from that. We learned from our Indigenous friends that each ceremony takes place in a shape-shifting continuum where all things are actually or potentially sacred, while understanding that the word sacred only remotely suggests what is really the case. For our Native friends, ceremony is a daily way of being. Native ceremony differs from the popular concepts of religious ceremony. Native ceremony is about participating in creation, and creation is not a singular event that happened in the past. It is creative movement happening in every moment. They understand that ceremony is an act of reciprocity, whether the ceremony is an impromptu prayer at a place where two woodland brooks join, at elaborate offerings on the slopes of Mount Fuji in aid of healing the earth after a nuclear accident, at celebration of a designated moment of the celestial calendar, or at a transition point in an individual's life. The reciprocity that a ceremony enacts reflects all things depending for their existence on all other things, and importantly, that each individual thing is inseparable from all others. Reciprocity calls on the person to join the circulation of abundance, offering your attention, acknowledgement, and relationship. In that way, you're doing your bit to keep things moving. You are animated and given energy by the universe and are called upon to put that energy back into circulation. From Tiokasin, we learn to see reciprocity as unification, in that you recognize your body is in the soul and everything is in the soul. Now remove the soul and everything is you without it, the container. It means the bird is in the trees. It means life without ego. When you are mistreating that soul, you disconnect from life. Reciprocity recognizes that other beings are teaching you ceremony. And by beings, Tiokasin doesn't mean just organic ones, animals and plants, but the beings that we Anthropocents call mountains, wind, rain, rivers, stars, trees, rocks. Reciprocity is related to the dynamics of the holism packed into the potent Lakota phrase, Mitakuye Oyasin, usually translated as all my relatives, a phrase now employed by many tribal people who are not Lakota to indicate the unique native orientation to what is. One Lakota teacher offers this fuller translation of Mitakuye Oyasin. It is, for all the above me and below me and around me things, that is, for all my relations. You see in this statement that things have become relations. When we observe Tiokasin walking to town from his home in rural New York State, putting down tobacco as he goes, sprinkling it on rocks beneath trees in the running creeks, that's ceremony. And at times of the year, building a fire pit outside his home and inviting anyone who wants to join him in a dialogue with the fire. A synchronicity. Or often when he gauges this informal fire ceremony, eagles fly over, a synchronicity. He says they join the ceremony, but probably, he adds, it is the birds who have initiated a ceremony, and that he and the others have joined. Tiokasin says about the little simple ceremony of just going outside and building a fire and sitting there, we don't need these grandiose cathedrals and all that. Our Native friends are always very careful about conducting ceremonies. Our friend Mindahi, an Otami Toltec ceremonialist from Mexico, calls this care being impeccable. Ceremonies are about relationships among beings, so one needs to be present in mind and body. Otherwise, the ceremony is meaningless. The ceremonies are relationships, at least certain aspects of them. A sweat lodge, an ipi in Lakota, or Tamazal in Otami Toltec, is a place where Native ceremonies regularly occur. The act of building the lodge is a ceremony, as is what takes place inside the lodge. Ceremonies might follow prescribed protocols or may be improvised in response to the flow of the moment. Either way, they pump energy of attention into a holistic network of relationships, seen and unseen, that constitute the universe. The feeling of relationships is always in the background. Step on a fallen branch in the woods and you hear it snap. You have a relationship with that branch. You are present in the world. Tyson Kaporta says, ceremonies and interactions with sacred sites keep creation in motion and are necessary for good health. All this is the action of the whole. John?
Okay, we're gonna let Tiokasin loose here. Jonathan, maybe you could tape the slide down. They probably don't need to be up more than a minute or two. Tiokasin?
Yeah, thanks for letting me loose. Wow. Thank you both for writing that, reading that, and letting us know what your thoughts were over these times, especially me, since I've been involved with you since 2015, I think it was. And how I met these two is another story. I'm sure there's 3 different versions of how we met and what compelled us to get together and come up with these ideas of Earth Man or Earth Mind, actually. But you know, the main component to all of this is story. What is a story? We often think about where does a story start and where does it end? But growing up listening to the folks that were born in the 1800s and being a young child at the time in the 60s, I'm listening to these older people talking about the continuum. And as I began to know older what time was and time clocks, basically, I began to understand, wow, they weren't talking about time at all. They were talking about cosmology and a spatial view that everything is affecting everything else. And when I think about that, how do I tell story in the Western context of begins here and ends here, and there's a lesson here, and you know, there's some great transformation. But what I heard was a transition of energy, transitioning. I think those who speak the Lakota language more fluently, totally fluently, Dakushkanshkan would explain the dimensions of, you know, spirit after dimension, and so forth, excuse me. And so the story about of what we're saying, what I'm saying, is never ending, that we have to understand our place in time as present. So to speak in metaphors of future and past is almost impossible when I was listening to these old folks because they were talking about being present. So they didn't use a present phobic language. They were always here, and it made me feel I was always a part of something, always a part of what they were saying and feeling that energy. And that's what I can say in English about that. And the story that I know, you referred to Black Elk, but we do know that there's more than one Black Elk. Even today, there's more than one Black Elk. There's hundreds of Black Elks, and there's maybe thousands around native, spread around North and South America, and maybe even more than that, that they all have that same centering, that the center of the universe is everywhere. And that's like the basis of inclusion without marginalizing anything. And I will actually go to something that I referred to when I was younger. I read this story about an anthropologist, a cultural anthropologist, who went into someplace in Central America. I think it was Honduras. And he ran across these indigenous folks who would, the small band of them would go and to where these megaliths, these tall standing stones were. There were 13 of them, I think he said. And they would go, and the young woman, the youngest woman, the girl would go with some sort of mallet, not in a modern sense of a hammer, but a mallet. And the people would sit around these stones, and that young girl would go up and hit the stone. And stones were 16, 20 feet tall. And then they would all sit there, and it was complete silence. So the cultural anthropologist was really wondering what is going on here. So, and then when that stone was once heard, the young girl would go to the next stone, designated stone, and hit that stone. And there would be two tones going, and then eventually all 13. And the cultural anthropologist did not hear a thing, nothing. And so he questioned, why are you doing this? And they said, we're listening to music, we're listening to the tones, we're listening to the earth. But he could not hear anything. So the next year, he came back with some grad students and with the sonar equipment to record things that they could not hear. And there was sound once they did this ceremony every year. And to listen to the tones of energy in that area of the world. And that story, that song is his story, actually. So I think about those things and how far most people are away from actually having patience enough to understand it and sit down and have patience for the earth. So I think about how far we've gotten away, even myself, because, even I speak a biophobic language. We often put it into the context of how Westerners understand things. We standardize our language, we our thought process so that they will understand us. And yet there's still not that understanding. There's connection, but it's not the relationship. And before we go too far off in tangent, it's like you've heard the idea or the book called It Takes a Village to Raise a Child, I think a few years back. But I differ from that. I say it takes a land to raise a child. It takes the land to raise a child. In native country, the land has been taken away. And so we don't understand the processes of those stars or how the wind blows or what grows on that land. So that land is no longer able to raise a child. So we put it in a context of human-centric logic. It takes a village to raise a child. I can go deeper in that, but I want to come back to the story of the cultural anthropologist recording to prove what the native people were already living. So he was using this technical equipment to use reality in a sense, as to when the Native people were living this relationship with Earth. Another story I like to refer to is Einstein, and I'm going to paraphrase this. Before I slaughter it, is in 1930, he had come to the Hopi, in that area of the Hopi. Hopi was one of the Native peoples in that area of Southwest in Arizona today. And he spent time with them, but some of you have read in his diary that he came away with that the 12-year-old children of quote unquote the Hopi were the most prepared to understand the theory of relativity. And I add that because they were living it, and because they, at that time in 1930, they were so remote that maybe that they didn't see the book. They didn't have the process of education. They had the oppressing of boarding schools and churches and government coming at them, but yet there was still a firm foundation of who they are. And I use that to understand that there is a relationship that maybe we haven't really understood, and that relationship is understanding this language that we use. It's very biocentric. And how do you relate to nature if you're taught in a foreign language about domination? And speaking with an uncle of mine, Virgil Kilstraight, a few years ago in the middle of Auschwitz and Birkenau, and coming to the end of the day where we sit in the lounge and we're all tired, and of course we saged so that we would go in a good way and sleep in a good way, and everybody, will be in a good way. And we sit there, and I quickly asked him, I said, Uncle, do we have the word domination in Lakota? He immediately said, no word, no concept for domination. And I take it as, so we need a relational language to speak with that which is non-human. We need this relational grounding, this consciousness that's alive here, not above or, above some sky god, and then we're going to go to someplace progressively divergent. And so when I thought about, we need this language of relationship. What happens when we're away from that? We fear nature, so we fear the relationship. So we start talking in technical terms. And this is probably my bias. And I say, connection just doesn't do it for me. It's always about relationship. Why not have a relationship with trees and the birds and the land? The relationship means that you're closer, that you're involved, that you're engaged, that you're in communication, and the language of relationship and communication is there. And I'm not, taking a connection and phoning them up and plugging in for a certain time, because we have been geared away, we've been educated that wisdom out of ourselves to live in a modern sense of progress and proof and marginalization as Native people. And so our relationship to land is getting smaller. And I also wanted to say that it's just not Native peoples in North America or the Western Hemisphere. There's also other peoples in the world. And if I could get to this, if you give me some time here, there is, where is it? Oh boy, it's not there. It could be here. Oh yes, okay. This is from, and I don't know I don't remember if Lawrence van der Post is an anthropologist or not, but he did have this, he wrote this. He writes about living among the Bushmen of the Kalahari Desert and describing how shocked they were that he couldn't hear the stars. And at first they thought he must be joking or lying. When they realized he couldn't hear the stars, they concluded he must be very ill and expressed great sorrow. And for the Bushmen knew anyone who couldn't hear nature must have the gravest sickness of all. And for nearly all the time humans have been on the planet, regular conversations across the species border were an everyday natural part of life. They were living in a relationship. And sadly, this seems like a strange invitation to the world today, the modern world. Most people have difficulty initiating such a conversation. Mother Earth is a very short conversations to a lot of people because we don't have the language to converse in relationship with Earth. And perhaps this is because we've been taught from a very young age to perceive nature as separate, right? That's kind of a given, a lifeless object, a commodity. And this mistaken perception seems to be at the foundation of today's cultural ills. So humanity's ability to perceive the sentience of Earth is critical to the survival of humans and to all life here on Earth. And so this is a different way of understanding that we long for that conversation with nature. And I really, not to be egotistical about Indigenous folks, but because of the language is saying that we long for that relationship, and maybe by protecting Indigenous peoples who still have that relationship, that's what we need to do rather than propping up an institute or, someone who has the money and asking only those natives who have made it in the world, that Western world of success. Maybe it's that one we haven't heard about. Like I use the example of the Bushmen, that they came out in stories like this. And so I go to this reference point, and I always have since I spoke English. My reference point is the Lakota culture, the Lakota language, because I was told that it's much thousands and thousands and thousands and tens of thousands years older than any language that came out of Occidental Europe. And how do you say, how young those languages are. And because they're stunted by objectivity and, objectifying and subjectifying. And that all has to do with domination. So I think I'll stop it right there and slow down a little bit. And
Okay, perfect. You'll be back on scene shortly.
Oh, great. All right.
All right, we're going to move to one or more of the items on that list. There's a philosopher, actually one of the, if I could say, one of the issues that we have to deal with in the book is, what do you call somebody like Tiokasin in English? We've settled on a couple of terms. One is philosopher. Doesn't accurately describe what's there, but it's the best we could do. One of the philosophers that we've been reading is Gregory Kahete of the Tiwa people. And he made the point that the indigenous earth mind is a metaphoric mind. Metaphor and its kin is another expression of the whole, which I'll try to show you. So what is a metaphor? Jonathan, if you could put up the first slide or the next slide, which should be a Robert Frost poem. That is a synchronicity. There's something going on there. We just leave this up for a little while, Jonathan. And
I can't see how to share my screen without going through my desktop on the way. I've tried various.
Okay, no, it's terrific because it illustrates some of the points that we're making. So let me find my place here. uh, to answer the question of what a metaphor is, we have to set aside many different categories of metaphor, and it's already been used a couple of different ways thus far in the talk. We want to focus on the type of metaphor that appears in poetry, which is the profoundest form of metaphor. It includes metaphor-like action found throughout the arts. A traditional poetic metaphor is an assertion that two incongruous items, call them X and Y, are somehow identical to each other, as in saying, my heart X is a nightingale, Y. For example, in one of his poems, American poet Robert Frost notices a patch of old snow covered with grime, X, and identifies it in his mind with Y, the look of a crumpled newspaper, leading to his realization that the patch of old snow is telling him about news of a day that he'd forgotten, if he ever read it. Poetic metaphor sets reality to vibrating with mysterious implicit news. Let's hit the next image. Often in literature, metaphor will depict a single item or a situation in such a way that we experience it simultaneously as itself and other than itself. It is literal, but it's also more than literal. It's implicitly much more. For example, in Franz Kafka's darkly comic novel, The Castle, land surveyor K wants desperately for the castle and its deep state bureaucracy to accept or validate him as a legitimate hire, as part of the castle. In this case, the castle is an X described in a way that implies that it is also unstated Y or Ys. For example, a castle that K is trying to gain recognition from might be understood as K's own identity, or perhaps it is God, or an essential secret knowledge of the universe, or it is our idea of the universe turned upside down. Readers come to experience the castle in Kafka's novel as an immensely meaningful and enigmatic entity that cannot be reduced to any paraphrase or concept. And to some extent, that is the point of the metaphor. By using metaphor, great artists make us experience, with a stab of pleasure or pain, that there is more going on in life than can ever be explained or said. That in a microcosm is a macrocosm, and it's there implicitly. The universe pulsates in a grain of sand. The purpose of the work of art is to stimulate us to experience that implicitness and to have the audience identify themselves with it. Metaphor does this in a way that is vivid and immediate. It creates a present. All the world's a stage. Wow. Somehow we experience that this metaphor implies what this metaphor implies, not its meaning, which remains forever mysterious, but its meaningfulness. It comes to us like a sunset. There's a literal situation or a thing that's being said, Kay trying to get a job in a castle. And in that, we experience something unspeakably meaningful beyond the literal. So metaphor stimulates our feelings about the mysterious news written on an old patch of old snow, our wonderings about what is being implied and not said about Kay's quest to be accepted by the castle, what impossible answer one might give to Hamlet's question whether to be or not to be. Metaphor makes us feel that there is something essential going on behind Mona Lisa's smile. It makes us swell with an impossible to define emotion when we hear the second movement of Beethoven's Seventh Symphony. Artists of all kinds make metaphors precisely because metaphors convey what seems both important and most mysterious about life. The indestructible emotions that an artistic metaphor indescribable emotions that an artistic metaphor might cause might be likened to walking through a familiar place and suddenly noticing that you have never seen it before. It is full of shadows. The next slide, please. The sense of truth that is a significant metaphor brings us, so to speak, is summoned out of the space between ideas and images that we recognize are radically different from each other, and yet in some strange way identical with each other. Grime on a patch of snow, a crumpled old newspaper, Captain Ahab's metaphoric pursuit of the great white whale Moby Dick equals something metaphysical and monumental. Why? The search for God, the slaying of the devil, life as an act of drowning in ambiguity. Poets have always insisted that artistic metaphor can't be interpreted as having some conclusive meaning. It can't be solved like riddles or equations can be solved. The truth of the great artistic metaphors that great artistic metaphors tell us is not something that can be spelled out in other terms. What do you want me to say? It again in Morse English? Frost responded when somebody asked for the meaning of one of his poems. If you try to explain an artistic metaphor, the truth of it dissolves like trying to imprison a snowflake in the warm palm of your hand. The reason for that is that the artist's metaphor brings to our emotional attention the elusive whole that is hidden in everything. Physicist Roger S. Jones extols the magic of poetic metaphor this way. This is a physicist talking. I define metaphor as an evocation of the interconnection among things. It is an act of consciousness that borders on the very creation of things, blurring the distinction between them, even between them and their names. I think of metaphor in a larger context in which all things are related to one another through an underlying unity. Metaphor tantalizingly evokes this hidden synthesis through its dramatic juxtaposition of apparently unlike things. It's as if the poet, in using a metaphor, not only refers to a symbolic or ironic connection between two things, but hints at the very creative act itself, which underlies all naming and evoking processes. So Jones's quotes, it goes back to a point that Tiokasin was raising about the difference between connection and relationship. Metaphor is suggesting the relationship between these extremely unlike items. Cajete points out that our normal, that is our anthropocentric mode of consciousness, operates in a categorized and fragmented world. When the metaphor calls attention to a grimy piece of snow, and we realize that it is delivering news, our realization puts the fragmented, object-cluttered world back together again. The great metaphor sabotages our facile anthropocentric divisions of the world into physical and conceptual objects, and in doing so, affords us both a glimpse and an experience of the whole. Empathy is involved. Poet T.S. Eliot is able to arouse the feeling of empathy by presenting the existential predicament of his protagonist, Alfred J. Prufrock. Let's have the slide. Using the now famous complaint metaphor. And I have known the eyes already, known them all, the eyes that fix you in a formulated phrase. And when I am formulated, sprawling on a pin, when I am pinned and wriggling on the wall, then how should I begin? Here, a feeling for the whole wells up as the metaphor makes us realize how painfully a formulated phrase negates the whole. For example, the whole of the person who is Prufrock by dividing it up. The divisions are a form of torture for us that the metaphor allows us to recognize and feel and perhaps heal. Formulated phrases are, of course, everywhere in the anthropocentric mode of thinking. The metaphor of the formulated phrase, X as a pin, Y, gets beyond the literal construction of reality and reveals implied layers of feeling. The traditional Japanese forms of haiku and tanka are well known for metaphors that evoke subtle layers of feeling, like this tanka by Master Masoka Shiki. You could put the next slide up, please. Stuck in a vase, clusters of wisteria blossoms hanging in the sickbed. spring begins to darken. Here the images of the flowers, the sickbed, the darkening light, and the spring come together as metaphor that invites the reader to feel something indescribable about the whole universe in which one is alive. Empathy and the implied whole are, in poet Archibald MacLeish's metaphoric advice in Ars Poetica. Next slide. For all the history of grief, an empty doorway and maple leaf. For love, the leaning grasses and two lights above the sea. A poem should not mean, but be. A poetic metaphor is not about meaning, but about empathy for what might be, for what might seem to be separate from you, but is not. Children naturally feel that empathy. They have naturally metaphoric minds. They connect things outside of logic and steeped in empathic feeling. Kahete observes that in contemporary society, when a child develops language and begins to use it extensively, quote, the holistic experience of the metaphoric mind begins to get chopped up and labeled until eventually it recedes into the subconscious, end quote. Later, beneath the surface, this buried metaphoric consciousness provides, or if buried too deep, fails to provide the soil for an individual's creativity. Kahete says, Tiokasin and others have shown us many times and in many ways how native language and ceremonies sustain the vitality of the metaphoric, holocentric mind far beyond early childhood as the foundation and is the foundation for the adult mind. The famous, might as well take the slide down. Jonathan, thanks. The famous French anthropologist Lévi-Brul pejoratively termed the mindset of peoples he called primitives or pre-logical. He described the mindset as one where objects, beings, phenomena can be both themselves and at the same time something other than themselves. Putting aside Lévi-Brul's racist bias, elevating logical thinking over pre-logical or primitive, read less intelligent than the anthropologist thinking. His observation about what this thinking involves, it seems on target. It is thinking like that of poets. It recognizes that everything we can name as a separate thing in the world is, if you examine it with a metaphoric lens, a mysterious, vibrant reflection of other things that are not logically connected. For those of us who live in anthropocentric cultures, poetic metaphor like Kafka's The Castle calls into question the apparent certainty of our fragmented reality and our mastery of it. By contrast, a traditional person lives in an enduring relationship to those metaphors. Empathic, metaphoric feeling guides action and knowledge. Yunkaporta says in Sand Talk that in his traditional knowledge, metaphors include, quote, metaphors include images, dance, song, language, culture, objects, ritual, gestures, and more. Metaphors are the language of spirit. But let's modify our terms at this point. Let's call a metaphor acting within the traditional indigenous context a holophor, in order to distinguish it from the many other kinds of metaphor discussed by philosophers, linguists, and other scholars. We would like to avoid some unnecessary confusion about this widely used term. Some people object strongly to making up new words, neologisms. But as Tiokasin has frequently remarked, English and other dominant world languages are inadequately and often quite misleadingly attempt to portray the earth mind consciousness. A new word here and there may help us prevent us from believing that we are dealing with concepts that we already understand, because the word that is used in the translation is familiar. Unfortunately, metaphor is a term ripe for confusion. So what Kahete called the metaphoric mind will replace with the neologism holophoric mind. We're proposing here that holophoric consciousness is an important feature of earth mind consciousness. A holophore resembles the poetic or artistic metaphor described above, but functions in the earth mind context. A holophore, similar to a poetic metaphor, opens the door to a place that is vivid and meaningful, but implicit. Holophores, like poetic metaphors and artistic metaphors of all kinds, are not meant to be translated into explanations or ideas. They are meant to be experienced. They are embodied. Perhaps they're a little like icebergs with most of their significant mass lying below the surface in the currents of the implicit. When you appreciate the Milky Way as a river or the Pleiades as the origin of humans, you are engaging in holophores that are in their way as true as the observations of astronomy. Black Elk describes the sacred pipe as a holophore packed within intimation of the whole and vibrant with mystery that underlies it. You can put up this slide, Jonathan. See the car again. There we go. Hi ho, the holy man says as he takes the pipe. This pipe which you have brought to me is really as sacred as the original pipe, which was given to us by the white buffalo cow woman. Indeed, to one who understands, they're really the same. But this pipe which you have now brought is especially sacred, for I see that there has been placed within it the whole universe. Black Elk later observes another angle of the sacred pipe as a holophore. Quote, you have taught us that the round bowl of the pipe is the very center of the universe and the heart of man. Holophores are accompaniments to consciousness that feels itself embodied in the universe. We all possess this consciousness, especially as children, but it is abandoned or mostly expunged as an individual grows up and finds residence in anthropocentric cultures. The ability to appreciate and participate in holophores and the holophoric mind requires the activity of intuition. Bob? You're muted, Bob.
Thank you. In the course of our many conversations, Tiokasin has greatly enhanced our understanding of intuition. We're familiar with intuition as the capacity for understanding something without reasoning it out. We say an intuitive person can sense what is coming or what others are feeling and can perceive complex, subtle meanings without specifying them or arranging them in an order. Intuition is sometimes called a sixth sense. Researchers have been trying to understand a sixth sense or type of intuition in animals. For example, animals en masse suddenly leave an area for no apparent reason. Then it turns out later that the area they vacated is violently shaken by an earthquake. It's as if the animals beyond their five senses intuited that the quake would happen. Birds, known as boobies in the Indo-Pacific, can intuit months in advance if there is going to be a strong El Nino. Researchers surmise that the intuition of animals comes from the fact that everything in an environment exists in a dynamic relational network with everything else. Complex webs of interconnected relationships are thought to lie behind the curious, holistic self-organizations discovered by chaos theory, where the fluttering of a butterfly in one region of the world can change the weather in distant regions. Similarly, the Lakota expression, "Mitaiku tells us that the universe works through interwoven relationships. Creatures intuit that there is an earthquake coming because dynamic networks of feedback connect animals, plants, insects, microbes, air, water, changing temperatures and pressures, molecular, and even quantum movements surrounding and including the tectonic plates, a vast network sensitive enough to detect and resonate the coming change. Intuition seems to be an awareness implicit in the relational network of the whole. Tiokasin says that intuition is one of the few words in English that he can use to suggest the character of the holistic earth-mind consciousness. For him, intuition is the feeling of being embodied in the earth. Quote, something you don't see, but you feel is there. Intuition is the sensation that something more is going on than can be perceived by our object-based, human-centered mode of consciousness. In Lakota, the feeling of intuition calls up for Tiokasin the old Lakota term, ohutka, a word that means being in touch with the roots of nature. He says, plants, animals, rocks, even water have roots, going back and back. The roots of the ancestors, the origin, the descent to the source. The roots are not just underneath us, they're also in the stars. We call roots wonagasape, which means being sensitive and influenced by spiritual energies. Intuition is daku shan. I'm going to try this again. Daku shakan. That's close. Which means in Lakota that
You're a lot better than I did.
that intuition doesn't come from humans. It's what you know when you look at the clouds. Intuition is awareness of the languages being spoken by other beings. The feeling of intuition is also wa'eglu do kecha, a feeling of everything in transformation, universal shifting, the holoflux. He points out we're always shape-shifting. You transform when you get rained on. You change when it's cold out. It's spring, and now we're all transforming in unison. When we ask him to describe the sensation of intuition, his answer is surprising. Silence. Inila wakan. In Ila is silence. Wakan is an awareness of the mystery contained within the silence. Notice your breath. When you inhale, it's like the movement of your life. You exhale, it's like the movement of your death. At the pause between inhale and exhale, you can feel the silence and the presence of mystery. That is the sensation of intuition. Try an experiment. If you have access to a patch of the natural world, join it and hear the sound of water over rocks, the clicking of dried leaves on a beech tree, or waves coming onto the sand. Hear the silence in those movements. Notice any change in your consciousness? Maybe, for no apparent reason, your state of being feels more open, more alive, more connected to what is not you, but that you are. Maybe you feel the presence of the grand movement that you are inseparably part of. In these sensations is a beckoning of the earth-mind consciousness. This seems to be what Tiokasin means when he says, it isn't that he has an intuition, but that the intuition has him. It's a sentiment that most creative artists will recognize. He also says, in my mind, intuition is the first sense. It precedes other senses. I think of it as gravity. It's a field we live in. It determines how we move. It's the sense closest to mystery. Intuition as a sixth sense is not located within the individual. Tiokasin insists, intuition emanates from the animals, rocks, clouds, the sun. Artists often talk about intuition as inspiration that doesn't come from them. It comes to them. The words of the poem came to me. It is an event of something much larger than one's own intuitions. You respond to something coming from the whole, from which you are inextricable. That's the feeling of intuition well known to people involved in creative activity. Our concept of wisdom is associated with intuition. In the various contexts of the arts, an artistic metaphor, whether verbal, visual, or musical, allows its audience to experience the artist's intuition along with their own. Historian Calvin Luther Martin describes this intuitive movement, this arrival and feeling of an intuition as when the one self becomes the whole self.
Okay, we had, just looking at the time, why don't we go maybe for 10 or 15 minutes, Tiokasin responding, and then yeah, if Tiokasin, if you want to just respond to that, and then we'll maybe go to questions and open up the conversation to people in the audience.
Okay, well read, guys. There's a lot in there, you know. I guess I'll start with a source. My 89-year-old mother, excuse me, I have allergies today. It's warm out here, and it's unusually 68 degrees in the middle of November, and so I have to deal with that. So I'll start with my mother. And not too many years ago, maybe 3 years ago, pre-COVID, is that she said to me, she says, son, we cannot speak Lakota without intuition. Now think about that, like, wow, just blew my Western mind to pieces. And I couldn't put it in subjective or objectifying anything. It's like, so intuition is free. Intuition cannot be packaged. And how far are we away from that natural feeling of being intuitive, being free of control, basically. People call it wild, and I know a lot of Native people don't have the word for wild because it's so natural for us to be, and even a word for nature, right? So I think about what happened along the lines of history according to the West, or the Western Europeans. Being cut off from nature is to first devise a language to keep us away from that consciousness of nature, the intuition. So we all know what happened in Europe. They burned the witches and the warlocks, the people of Earth, and introduced more dogma. And of course, that came over in ships. And it came over in ships, and those of us standing with the view from the shore in the eastern seaboard here, watching the ships coming with those ideas, those fears, those oppressions, those dominations, and, you know, and losing intuitive values with Earth, relationship with Earth. And I think about that and how long that has been going on before it got here, it arrived on our shores. And the fear of nature, again, I'll go back to the biophobic language. The fear of nature is something that I cannot get away from. When I'm hearing my mother speak it and hearing Lakota speak their language, speak that language, there's a awe, a sense of having an awe about everything, a mystery, a wakan, if you will. And I'll describe that as what I can come up with is, we could say it's purity, pure energy, put it together. We can say that it means holy or sacred or something like that to put it into English. But then again, you have to really look at what does it really feel like. The wakan is to consciously implying, well, let's just put it this way. Nature, I don't think has conscience, but that may be an anthropocentric thought, as my training in the West says. Nature doesn't think unless we apply whatever we think it is to it. So to me, nature does not have a conscience. Nature has consciousness, it's always present. So the language of presence, the wakan I talk about, I'm giving no secrets away here because it's almost impossible to give any secrets away in Lakota in English. But we can round it out, as you say. Wakan would mean basically to make something live or die, but everything in nature, in human lives, and has that power to make something live or die. Everything. So it goes back to energy can either be created or destroyed. So what is left is, where is our presence, our consciousness, our wakan, our intuition? Being in the present is understanding what's going on with the earth, because the earth has been at it far longer. So those peoples who have the languages of consciousness with earth, consciousness, not conscience, that it is, in fact, that's what's missing from the ships that came with the fear and came with property and progress and, you know, all these. And you encounter, I mean, the ships encounter the people who see lying as a weakness. And that's as foreign to Lakota as smallpox was. As part of the decisions made in courts today, even Judge Abby Absanati, who explains it's easy to lie to people who don't have lies as part of their culture because they don't have defense against it. And so when I think about intuition being at the primary, you know, thought process, and that's removed, that relationship to nature is no longer talked about. It's the words of nature are being removed from dictionaries because of the digitizing, the technical, and always a savior mentality, salvation point mentality comes along with dogma. Now, I know Virgil described to me that there may be, I think he said 22,000 organized religions in the world. And there's only one, and they all have dogma. There's only one spirituality, and that's the earth. That's earth. And so this dogma is a distancing. It removes us from being here and puts you into, again, present phobic language. You don't want to be here. You want to make something progressively better and not deal with the responsibility of being here. And that way of seeing how I feel about it, of course, it comes from the thoughts that I had based on what I've gone through growing up on reservations. And the translations lost that Black Elk supposedly said, you know, that they're not really true to what I'm feeling could be. And if I had my druthers, of course, I'd want everybody to be speaking an indigenous language in the areas they are. So you would think about how the Lakota were in with other folks around that area of geographically centered North America and the Black Hills, how 9 or so, 10 or so other languages were spoken and dispersed, interrelated as far as the land, and maintaining consciousness with that land and not to take so much. And, you know, always leaving something for not just humans, but for other species, animals, to use that land, to use it as medicine too. After all, that's where we got how we observed how to have language, how we observed how to pick medicines, because they showed us. And so that the learning capacities that I've grew up with was being shown how and not instructed how to do something. And you need nature to do that, to show you how to live with nature.
Yeah.
And so the consciousness that I seem to want to say is within the word wakan, is the consciously applied mystery to everything. So if you walk through your daily walk in the woods or whatnot, maybe turn that around, that it's all conscious of you being there. It's aware of you. Your vibe, like a horse can scan you before you even get there and knows all about you. Well, that's the same with nature. And so humans, we kind of make up the magician part of it, thinking that we can guesswork by measuring and weighing and taking things apart in order to control. And we speak about that freedom all the time because that's what we miss. Whereas intuition is free and the language of that intuition is free. So this is why I'm saying a lot about our languages must be not preserved like jam or conserved, but must be paid attention to, because these are languages of earth. And that these languages, how do I say, Nasula is what I was described, is that the brain is only a seed of the heart. So our language only comes from the heart, and the tool of the brain is what communicates it. Whereas I hear a lot in other circles, educated circles and New Age circles and whatnot, is that we want to go to the heart, like take the journey there. And it's a visit, and then you come out. But if you have a peoples who are coming from the heart all the time and understanding the memories of nature, of heart there ingrained, and it's coming through to the conscience part, where we often describe our ego. And that ego seems to be in fear of nature. So if you see this, like that tree is not, that leaf on that tree is not saying, am I the right color? Am I blowing right in the wind? Am I doing the right thing? It doesn't have consciousness. It just is. It's consciousness, right? And I think about that's what the word wakan would come around to being. There's so much that I could go on with, and just sitting and observing when I was young on a hill, the birds and crawling things and flying by, and the changes in the weather and the shadow and the winds, and on these horses when I was young, and the small gardens that most people saw as a wasteland because there was nothing else modern on it. Even in those days, I would sit and watch and understand the transition of energy, not transformation, because I always wonder, we're going to transform from what to what? That's kind of a bypassing language. We need to be here, especially for Earth, So I think about that, and the questions that I often get from students is how to do something. But how do you do this? Because it's safer to ask how to do something for instructions than actually take the risk of going out and making your experience, even the mistake of an experience. So you see, the learning processes are different, and showing and watching, observing is what I think a lot of Indigenous peoples still do. And to put it in question about, we speaking a language of confliction and antagonism at the same time means there's a lot of doubt, and you feel like you always have to catch up. So I'm probably going off in another tangent metaphorically, but yeah, I think it's seeing things different and feeling it different, rather than coming up with explanation to say, this is how I feel, this is how I think, this is how but there's a word in it, always I. As a noun, you are a noun, no longer a verb. So when I would understand how grandma and grandpa would speak, and I would listen to them, and they were totally speaking the male version and the female version, I just sat in awe and wonder, could feel and see, and almost feels like I could touch the energy between them because it was Wakai, it was so pure. And that was because they were and are from the earth, not from a sky god or something, but they understood what that 7 generations from them, before and after that, every generation is like, I am the 7th generation. Every generation is the 7th generation. And so we understand to be in place is more responsible than try to be something better, because the dictation of another civilization is telling you that you're not okay being who you are. And so the language of consciousness, intuition, is being present with nature, and that nature is going to be louder, and not we can't ignore her anymore. We can have all kinds of conferences and retreats and all, but maybe that's the Western way. Maybe it's going and understanding those natives who are already living what we're talking about. Yeah, so
that's probably a good place to
Mhm.
maybe turn it over. I know, Jonathan, did you want to give people a break, or we're sort of close to the end?
No, I think we should press on, if that's okay with you guys, unless you guys actually.
Okay, you want to moderate a discussion?
Yeah, I'll step in now. Jonathan, do you want to come in and say anything, or shall I hand it over to the participants?
A couple of things quickly, because my mind's absolutely buzzing with fascination here. But I was particularly struck by the holophores as an idea, as a notion. That seems to me to be extremely powerful. And one of the thoughts that occurred to me earlier in what you were saying was with regard to ceremony, and the way you were describing ceremony. Actually, now, as we develop the thoughts further, I actually wonder if ceremony is a form of holophore.
Yes.
But also, we talk of ceremony as something that starts and ends, but I actually wonder if it does.
Never
Does it
ends.
just sort of, move into a peak and then fade away again? And is it more a description along those lines?
Yeah, if I could just add, Tiokasin should deal with that deeper question of ceremonies without beginning or end. But you're absolutely right that in the framework that we're discussing it, ceremony is a holophore of the kind that we were trying to describe, and it doesn't necessarily have a fixed meaning.
Yeah.
Which means that generations of anthropologists misled people about what is going on. I mean, we were quite struck with ceremony was not something that we went into this. Bob and I went into this project thinking would be as important as we discovered that it was. And as wonderful, you know, we never discussed ceremonies that are sort of sacred ceremonies that are performed by various groups within a tribe, or you know, the kind of thing that New Agers would go to. They go to find an Indian so that they can sort of follow that, you know, get hold of that secret knowledge, which is all of what Tiokasin was talking about, the domination, the possession, you know, all of that. We dealt with experientially with very simple ceremonies, sweat lodge ceremonies, four direction ceremony. These are very, you know, sort of easy. Anybody can do them, and began to feel that you became part of that metaphor, just doing that. But Tiokasin should speak to the deeper issues of ceremony.
Yeah, ceremony, excuse me, ceremony is like, when it's happening, you're recognizing energy. A lot of Native people have sacred sites. We could say that is designated by who? The Department of Interior, or some religious connotation that said it's okay because that's ceremony, and you did ceremony. When we encountered you Native people there, you were having ceremony or a ritual, which is far different. So I think recognizing in energy that ceremony can happen any place because it's always moving, it's energy. Or a ritual is in 9 o'clock Sunday morning. And you repetitive, you sing the same songs, and where my encounters with ceremonies happened anytime without having to, you know, present it as, well, this is a ceremony. So the other day, when Bob and I and John and a few others met, when we were finished talking, that was ceremony, because the energy changed. We recognized it. And it was nothing that you could own, or what's your takeaway thought process. You couldn't take this as a takeaway as a package. It's, wow, we recognize, what did we give to it? What energy did you give to it? And so we recognized the energy. And then we went on our way, right, knowing that we were part of a ceremony. So I would answer it that way for now.
And one other brief thought, because people want to come in, but speaking again of intuition, and I think this is a very, potentially could be an extremely fruitful area for dialogue, because it's kind of like synchronous for me, because I think I mentioned just last night to others that may have been on the call that earlier in the week I'd spent a very, very entertaining and informative day talking to physicist Basil Hiley, and talking to him about the skills of a scientist, the mathematical and technical, and he put intuition as paramount. And I know certainly, you know, when I've been involved in teaching science in schools, it's always portrayed as a very dry, analytical thing, whereas actually for the practicing scientist, the intuition, the connection with nature, the sensing what the answer is, you know, is a very powerful aspect of it, which I often wish we could capture in our education more. And that would give more life, I think, to science as an activity.
Can I just introduce one quick thing, just maybe provocative. Synchronicity, which is, you know, something comes together with it, and you can't trace a causal relationship between another, is similar to metaphor.
Yeah.
Is similar to non-locality. Right. So it seems to me there's something very suggestive in that fact. And they both, and all three of them seem to be evidence for a holistic kind of movement that's taking place.
Agreed.
The fact that the synchronicity happens, and Tiokasin often plays, not plays, but he has the effect of a Zen master sometimes, because he'll, we're so I-centered that when we think of having a ceremony, we think that we're having the ceremony.
Right.
All right, so you make the fire, and the eagles start flying over, and Tiokasin just points out that you joined the ceremony that was already taking place.
Yeah.
It wasn't your ceremony.
Yeah.
And if you stay with that a little bit, it's really quite, the effect on your consciousness is really quite shocking.
Yeah. And I think part of that is it's when I had a fire summer ago with some people showing up and expecting a ceremony, and no pipe or drum or rattles or feathers or smoke. People expecting ceremony the way they thought a ceremony should happen. And the thing I did differently, which I always do, is and Bob and John know this as well as other people, I don't take people into sweat lodges. I don't do stuff like that. That's not for me. I can't do that. That's for people who know how. I mean, I participate and I go. But mind you that I don't follow or I don't lead. I'm with the ceremony. I'm with the people that have ceremony. And how do I say this now? So the people that came to the fire, I had them introduce themselves to the fire. Don't introduce yourselves to each other as humans, and I do this and I do that, and I have this PhD and that in front of me or but behind me, and all of a sudden we become alphabet people. It's like, no, introduce yourself to a fire. And that was just met with like disbelief. Maybe some people dismissed it and they just could not recognize that there was a presence of something that's much older that we're able to relate to as fire. In the Lakota language, Kata Wahankashnielo means fire without end. Who wouldn't want to be with something that isn't ending? Because we talk about mortality and living forever in this society, but that's what energy does. And so fire comes from that continuum, and we need to be present with that, and not like ahead of the fire, behind the fire, but with it at that moment. So being in the innocence of that energy in that moment, because that moment will never happen again. So we understand it that way, at least I do, is the understanding that we have to have a different tact, a way of thinking differently. Introduce yourself to the fire, because the fire already knows who you are. It burns inside you, but you can't jump into the fire because you'll burn up. And, where's the relationship to that? So in a way, ceremony is recognizing what's already there, recognize the energy. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, should we open it up?
Absolutely. Veronica, would you like to come in?
Thank you, Eleanor. Thanks to all of you and the beautiful slides of the caves. The first two slides that you showed were very moving, very beautiful. One quick comment. Everything you said reminds me always of Jean Gebser, the ever-present origin, that he also said we need a total mutation in order to see it again, feel it again, experience it again. Anyway, my question to you is what do you think of, or how would you, or could you talk a little bit about the Wetico that Paul Levy is writing about?
Yeah.
Is Wetico the totality of the ego, or is it the shadow that we never managed to see or see too late?
Well, when Bob and I went into the issue of Wetico, and it's impossible to avoid because we're in a period where it is rampant. We try to take it from a fellow named Forbes, who taught in one of the California schools. What's the title of his book? Columbus Cannibals.
Columbus and Other Cannibals.
Columbus and Other Cannibals. Do you know that book?
No.
Yeah, I would recommend that. That's a Native American perspective on Wetico, which is obviously a Native American. It's a Cree term. And
Veronica, they've put the name of the book and the author in the chat.
Thank you.
so that I think it's the psychology is interesting, but from our perspective, it's the anthropocentric consciousness gone wild. Okay, so our premise is that the anthropocentric consciousness is absolutely necessary, but when it becomes unbalanced, and that's one of the characteristics of Wetico, that's it's unbalanced. So you're applying what Tiokasin is called conscience. You're applying a conscience to everything, and it amounts to an inflation of the ego, I would say. Okay, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That helps a lot.
Yeah, I just add something that's sort of a tongue-in-cheek philosopher that I am, is that there is, you often hear good and evil. So I change it to good and ego. That evil is often coming from a human-centeredness of not, following the rules, so to speak. Therefore, you're off target. You're not hitting, the arrow's not hitting the target. And that's called sin. And so that was brought over here. And yes, respect was removed for all life. And if we have ego, that's going to get in our way. And we know it's all humans have it. But I always wonder, does nature have ego? And I think about that, and they are just being who they are, what they're living, they're alive, they're doing what they're created to do. But the human has not learned how to live with the earth yet. And I think that's a mainstay for what a Wendigo would not be, to get us away from living with earth, or a Washichu in that mindset of taking too much, so there's not enough, not just for other humans, but for all other life forms. Yeah.
Tiokasin, could you very quickly tell the story of Washichu, where that name comes from? Because I think it's a good place in the conversation to hear that.
Yeah, in noun form, it really means Washichu means one who takes the fat or takes too much, and has to do with the better part of a deer or a buffalo. The talo was a rich form, and the white fat, which was so rich in nutrient that we would use it in soups and in the Lakota Nation. And that was taken by, from what I just heard from many people's, how that's used differently. It could mean white eyes, it could mean white people, it could mean greed, but I think it's really the basis of ego, and that we want to self-preserve because of ego. And when I think about Washichu, then, oh yeah, I can be that too, because of that wisdom being educated out of me with earth. I don't have the natural rhythms with earth anymore. So therefore I must come up with excuses why I need to survive through greed and by taking an ownership. So that's a long way around about.
Yeah,
describing
it came,
Washichu.
I had asked Tiokasin one day, I think we were at Standing Rock, what the Lakota name for the white man was. And he said Washichu, and then he told the story of the guy the white guy who shows up in the Lakota camp, starving. Lakota feed him, but he decides to take the tallow and eat it.
Yeah.
Himself without asking.
Yeah, and that was surprising to a lot of Lakota back then, I'm told. So I listened to what the elders tell me. It's like, oh, that's how it was, that they came to take more than they needed.
Right.
Which is
So it's similar to Wetico in that regard.
Some people call it the hungry ghost.
Right.
Yeah.
But takes too much is a perfect description of the historical white man anyway.
Thank you. Manfred, would you like to come in?
Oh, yeah, yes, now. Tiokasin, it's really so deep touching what you said. And for me, on the other hand, it's mind-blowing. And I had 100 questions, and I saw 3 times now the recording of communion with the wild from you. And the question I have is when you say today, there is no word for domination in Lakota language. And you also said there is no word for human being. Is there any way of expressing it? Or how, my problem is I could not imagine. I tried it with Blackfoot also. I could not imagine how you handle it. It's totally blank. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, in relationship to that expressing is that I often found, because of the education I do have in the Western Hemisphere, I mean, the Western Europeans' way of thinking, mental knowledge, is I often know that we didn't have a word for time, the beginning and ending. We also didn't have the domination, meaning better or worse or superior, inferior. There is neither, is there the causal effect, the pathological cause and effect. So that's the box that we all work in the Western mindset. And so when I think about why we don't have certain words is, and then why we can't express it, is that's what we miss. When we're more in nature, we can feel what we can express, and if that makes sense. So when you go into nature, you what I do is, wow, nature is teaching me how, or showing me how to listen, because I have the presumption that I can go, or assumption I can go into nature and I'm going to sit down and I'm going to listen, because that is coming from my ego. And then you go away, well, here's how what I heard and how I listened, and we start objectifying it right away instead of just sitting with it and not having to explain it and come out with an agenda. So we go there, we listen, we just take it in. And English, it tends to new age everything. It's a new world, a new method, a new brand of thinking, a new narrative. It's always this starting over again, when it's ignoring the fact that there's something that ongoing all the time. So I think that understanding how expressive, or least expressive, the language I'm talking now has to have so many words to explain an iota of that feeling, right? And I'm explaining this to you because when I say human being, I know what it means in English, but in Lakota it's wichasha or ikche wichasha, but the word implicitly is wichasha. Wicha is a star or stars, and sha is like a gift. So now you can put that in a Western scientific mind and say, oh yes, we are indeed stardust. You know, you can say that. So how do these primitive people know this? Is because the language comes from that old way of being with the universe cosmology, and even Earth, the etymology of Earth as a being, as a mother, always a being, not the Western. I mean, I could say, well, yeah, here comes the astrology, and that comes from the Greeks, right? So yeah, it's nice and fun, but that has no application here. It's like a fun and games thing. So, these things they seek to take away our natural ability to understand uploading from Earth and make it into mental concepts. So in that way, I don't know if I answered your question, because maybe there's none.
Thank you very much. So it draws me back to activate more the feeling process, not the mind process. I cannot catch it with the mind. Thank you very much.
But I could just add quickly, think about nature shows that you see on TV, how much nature is portrayed as a game of domination. And what Tiokasin is calling attention to is that may be a completely wrong way to think about it.
Thank you, John. Wendy, would you like to come in?
Oop, muted.
You're muted, Wendy.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Sorry, I couldn't find it without my glasses. First of all, thank you. Thank you so much. You reawakened in me that natural, intuitive feeling of the truth, when we hear truth and we're reminded of how we're supposed to live. And when you described the people watching the ships from the shore, it made me cry. One of the most, I spent much of my time thinking that in America, what would have happened had we adapted the ways of the people that were here instead of what had happened, the way it went, and how beautiful this world would be, and I loved when I learned that the definition of mental illness was taking more than you need. Anyone who took more than they need in Indigenous ways was considered mentally ill. And I just, it's amazing. But I just wanted to say that, hearing you affirmed all the things I've learned. I left New York City 12 years ago, and I've been living on a small island. I'm back in New York City now, but the thing that it allowed me to do, and this was without any prior education, it allowed me to live in nature and be conscious of the consciousness of nature you speak about. And I started communicating with trees, with wild animals, and the conversations that happen it's everything you said. And it's like anyone can do it if you allow yourself to truly be there and just stay open to it. And as a result, like when I go back to New York City, I actually ache for it. And I just wanted to say thank you. I'll try and send Eleanor some great communications I've had with with iguanas, wild iguanas now that love me. And I will tell you that they love Frank Sinatra. Every day at 4 o'clock, I play Frank Sinatra, and he can't be doing a swing song. It's got to be a ballad. They all come out and listen. And it's remarkable. There's a communication when you even think to them. You know, they don't understand English, of course, but when I think something to them, they respond and they tell me what they need, and I know what they're needing. It's been just amazing. So thank you for awakening in me this beautiful path, and to remind me of the affirmation of all you say and the truth you say. And I wish the world had gone a different way so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Would anyone like to come in and respond to that? All right, we are on the hour, so I think we should start to close up. Is there any closing remarks that John or Robert, anything you guys would like to say now? John, you're muted.
I would just interject back to something that just came up, and that is there's no word in Lakota for we in our hundreds of hours of conversation with Tiokasin, we've created a list of words for which there is no word in Lakota. And if you examine that list, these are words that we would be better off not having. And I think, you know, the domination would be one example of that. And so if we could replace or eliminate all those words and replace them with Lakota, we'd be all set.
Beautiful. Thank you, Robert.
So are you, John, going to say anything? Because I think I have something to.
Yeah. One point that I think is worth making, which sort of made in other directions, but I was looking at some material which talked about collective enlightenment and global consciousness, and I'm struck by the fact that you know, from the perspective that we've been developing with Tiokasin, that seems like a very odd concept, because of course the people who say collective consciousness or global consciousness don't include whale consciousness or crow consciousness or butterfly consciousness or the consciousness of water, which was the whole sort of reason for the Standing Rock movement. So we've got quite a ways to go, I think, to understand how those words on the list, for which there's no Lakota equivalent, have structured our minds or emphasized a certain quality of mind that has divorced us from the natural world, and we're seeing the result of that now. And you know, well, I'll leave it at that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, just to quickly say that a lot of this reference point comes from my mother. He says, well, there's no meaning for that. So if there's no meaning for that, is there a need for it? And if we're indeed speaking a needy language, lacking of everything language, what does that turn us into? Instead of speaking from abundance and generosity, not because of what you own, because that word is not, ownership is really, it's part of domination. It's part of domination. So, you know, to really look at these words at the etymology of the language I'm speaking to you now, but also to say to children that there's no future because there's extinction. In my friend Martin Shaw said this. He said that's disrespectful. That's doing a disservice to the children, our DNA as humans. Even that beyond humans is the others. we're saying, well, you're going away now, so therefore, we're in charge now. We're going to do better than the animals did. So it's implying a lot of different theories. So I always say that there is a future if we understand how to be here now, and that there's no word in extinction in the Lakota language. There's no word. So how could there be climate change? And I'd say that we're out of rhythm. We're not speaking a rhythmic language. We're not expressing her ideals, her way of living continuously before we came along. And yet we are still trying to adapt her to our needs. Now it's time to turn that around and adapt ourselves to her needs. And that would really mean that there is this spiral effect of, and I'll use my friend's explanation and definition of what the future is. It's a spiral. And coming from the Maori people, he said there's a spiral. And he said, my people are walking backwards into the future. And I asked him why. And he said, because we want to know where we've been so that we don't make the same mistakes in the future. So therefore, if we know what we did, we can trust the future. Where the Western wants to walk just forward and forget about the past. They just want to walk forward and be afraid because they don't know where they've been. So maybe it's retooling that mental capacity of intellectualism and making really intelligent decisions from the earth rather than through the bank and the objectivity of earth and ownership and domination. So enough before I go on. That's enough. Thank you.
This is really great. Thank you, John, Robert, Tiokasin, and of course, Jonathan. As we close out, I do have a few announcements. Just a reminder that our Wholeness series concludes tomorrow. So tomorrow is our last session, main session in this series. Sunday, November 19th, Universe's Process with Chankar Gag. Thank you all so much, and we look forward to seeing you soon.